sessions at 15:40. So do you just want to, okay, everybody, I'm happy to continue this process now with these sort of couple of final points from these presentations. I just want to check, Jonathan, are you good to speak when you're ready?
I am, yes.
Lawrence?
I am, yeah.
Norrie?
Yes, I'm Paul. Yep.
Yes. Okay, so I think probably because we've done different sessions in terms of what's happened here. I did 2 in the future energy system. I think Lawrence did future energy system and raising awareness. I think Norrie did transport and public investment, and then Jonathan did distilleries. So I'm actually going to just slightly alter the order now so that we have a bit of a more seamless thing. So I'm going to start off with 1, and then Lawrence, you add anything that you might have from 1, go to 2, and then Norrie, you do the road of transport and your comments on public sector investment. Then Jonathan, you do public sector investment and finish with distilleries. If everybody, I know, everybody got that in terms of the process. I think that the issue that just in sort of a minute or so that we were dealing with the future energy system was a broad ranging issue, the issue of cost and affordability, and that versus renewable energy. Views about the importance of sustainability must be the most critical factor. You can't judge the right solution for Islay based on cost. Some people said that if you waited until the cost was the viable basis on which you proceed, nothing would ever happen on Islay. And then that was supported by a number of people who saw no pace in the system. Quite a few comments about too many studies, too much prevarication, and taking too long to get to a situation. Be bold, be sensible, use the existing technologies. So we move from a situation of what's the future energy system look like, about sensible paced, use the technologies, transition and change, to a wider group who were anxious that the community knows the issues and knows the problems and needs to really get on with it because things take quite a long time to get through the process. So I think that the awareness of some of the cost issues and the subsidies and the support that can come, perhaps it's not as great as it could be. And there's also a view that, particularly in the older community, you're very reliant on fossil fuels and not necessarily as comfortable with electricity as a reliable supply. Might be anxious about changing and switching, and so education in that process might need to occur over time. But the general view was there needs to be a solution. Electricity will be a fundamental part of Islay's long-term future, and therefore landing another cable on the island and resolving the grid needed to happen. Everyone knows that. So whilst it may be perceived to be much more complex, many more issues, many subtleties and variabilities, is there a fundamental issue? So that's a sort of a summary of the points that came out of that debate. It was perhaps broader than the narrow question. Lawrence, was there anything additional in terms of your second workshop on the future energy system? And so please say if you have, or if not, go on to raise an awareness. So Lawrence, thank you.
Cool, yes. So just staying with the future energy system, covered some of the issues that you talked about in your sessions. But something that was an important thing to consider and be aware of was the timeline and the process that's involved. So obviously, the transition period brings with it costs, but a long-term view is needed to understand that over the development and maturity of these systems, the benefits will come, and those benefits will be numerous. So there may be some communication effort involved there, and also work on business cases, things like that. But very important to focus on the fact that with time, costs bring the benefits. Obviously, we started this meeting with the survey that acknowledged that the environment was the sort of principal concern for the people attending today. So that sort of helped to answer the first question quite clearly. We also thought about enabling technologies, so anaerobic digestion being one, also tidal technologies that are developing, trying to get off the ground and generating energy on Islay 2. Thinking about incentives, so there need to be national incentives to get the ball rolling, but also local incentives to address what might be perceived as market failure in getting things off the ground and making use of the resources that are on Islay. It might be that people, existing infrastructure, community support, and so forth. So that's dealing with that workshop. Firstly, earlier in the day, we had a conversation about raising awareness, gathering my notes. So this was a really fruitful discussion. We talked, first of all, about how important it is to raise awareness across the whole community, and particularly we talked about education and how using schools is a great way of engaging not only with children, but with the whole community. And there are some really excellent examples already on Islay of projects that have engaged with the schools and education provision on the island. Also, engaging with education links up with other priorities in the growth deal. So it's a sensible thing to do from that perspective. In order to gain support, having raised awareness, the work needs to be relatable. There needs to be a hook that will interest people. The wind turbine project is a good example of a success in that regard. It had no objections at planning. So there may be lessons to be learned there. A really important point was credibility and delivery. It's all very well consulting with the community, but if you're unable to deliver on the results of that consultation, then you lose credibility. So there need to be resources in place to support that. One particular example was the fact that heat pumps are becoming more popular, but there are no accredited installers of heat pumps on the island. So there's a bottleneck there, and that can, the supply chain needs to develop in order to support the energy transition on the island. Other island communities in Scotland and elsewhere actually may also have lessons that can be learned, the strengths and experience there. So that's worth thinking about. Finally, also a holistic view needs to be taken. We talked earlier, and the speakers earlier in the afternoon talked about housing issues, jobs, these broader problems really that are associated with the Islay is addressing in 2021, and an energy system, an energy strategy cannot solve those problems, but it can be planned in such a way that it is part of a broader approach, and so that was very important.
Thank you, Lawrence. Norrie, do you want to come on and talk in a similar vein about transport, and then do the first bit of public investment before Jonathan takes the public investment thing on?
Yeah, of course, and I would like to put my camera on, but it's not allowing me, but the host has stopped it, but I'll keep going. So obviously group number 3's role was to consider what role transport can play in leading the energy strategy for Islay. Interestingly, there was a little bit of a debate about the potential for what I might think are slightly easier wins, and that is, for example, extension of bus services, which reduces private car use on the island, the use of similarly carbon reduction approach where unaccompanied haulage can contribute to carbon reduction, and there was reference to the new ferry, which has a significant increase in efficiency and is part electric. So, you know, that was quite significant. There was also comments regarding how transport may potentially be, there's my video, how transport can potentially be slightly behind in terms of the other, you know, heat and power, obviously heat being a massive influence on the island, and transport can benefit though from the, you know, potential improvements to the grid. There was an interesting point made about the constraints and potential constraints associated with certain goods, notably whisky, on transport, which may have possible issues with the likes of selected fuel use. There can be some constraints in terms of it being considered, in inverted commas, a dangerous product. There was reference to, just a couple more points on this, there was a reference to, and I think this is a good example where Scottish Water were represented, and their fleet is, changing, obviously on the mainland, but on the island as well, potentially. And as they change and produce electrical powered vehicles and even hydrogen in the future, is the island going to be ready? Is the grid going to be ready for that? And finally, on transport, I would just say there was a general awareness about the issues and the constraints and the problems and the challenges, but there was I think a collective agreement and an interest of the community and the business to try and push things forward. So that's probably the role for transport, Paul. Shall I move on to public investment?
Do a little bit of public investment, and then Jonathan can take that on and then go to distilleries.
Sure. Just very briefly, really, on public investment. I think a key one really was, and this came out a number of times during the conversation, there's a need to have an absolute shared vision for the island. There was a suggestion that could be by 2030 net zero as one example of that shared vision. But that shared vision need to be bought in by the whole community and the business and the distilleries. There was a suggestion by one or two people that whilst everybody's contribution is absolutely welcome, that there needs to be a greater momentum and attention and focus, almost by full-time individuals on a day-to-day basis, worrying about this and being paid to deal with it, rather than how it's maybe going to potentially in the past has drifted. There was reference to the fact that the growth deal was absolutely welcome. It was seen as a fantastic opportunity and it shouldn't be lost. But at the same time, there needed to be a commitment and a push to make it actually happen. And finally, there was a slight concern in relation to the potential for the community and the distilleries to progress slightly faster than the community and the businesses other than the distilleries can keep up. That was probably the main threads, I think, Paul.
Thank you very much, Norrie. So, Jonathan, do you want to tackle 5 and then go back to 4?
Yes, will do. A lot of consistency in terms of the comments that came through in my group as well from what Norrie has just said. So really just to, I suppose, add to that, the importance of having that shared vision that you mentioned, Norrie, where there is clearly the group is pleased to see that there are reports being written and options being analysed, but it's really important to move beyond options to start to focus into decisions and to start to look at how one can arrive at an implementation strategy which works both in the short and the long term. I think that's crucial. How does one get there? Well, then we need to have a clear stakeholder mapping process here, so there is a clear understanding of the needs across the board, and that will help us to arrive more quickly, perhaps, at a solution which is a common fit for all. I think the other point to pick up on is, when we talk about public investment, that could come in the form of funding and cash, but it could also come in the form of streamlining processes. And it was mentioned in the plenary sessions as well, and this is not to undermine the due process of perhaps getting a planning permission or some similar things, but it is to say, if there is a wider understanding in the community of the challenge that they face or they will be facing, and an understanding that there needs to be an answer to that sooner rather than later, is there a role within the decision makers, within government, within whomever, to assist in making the process of achieving an outcome quicker than it is currently? Things take too long to get through the system, and can that be speeded up? So I think that was another point. And then comments around, let's look now at what we can achieve on island. What schemes have we got which are spade ready? And how can we start doing things which don't detract from getting to the right long-term solution, but start us on the journey. So that's my additional comments from the public investment side. Just really to quickly touch on from the distilleries group, very clear that there's a shared view around the importance of getting to a common understanding of what the end goal should be here, and a desire to collaborate where practical within the industry as well as more widely within the island community to get to the right solution. Collaborative approach is more likely to achieve a better outcome for all, but a recognition and a desire for this to be recognised that there are some short-term imperatives that need to be addressed to deal with business continuity, and that will necessarily perhaps open up that debate around short-term solutions to take you on a journey versus what the long-term and long-term sustainable solution looks like. There are my points.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan. The one thing that did come out from Keith from Jura about being ahead is that Jura now have 3 electric vehicle charging points, but no electric vehicles. So that is interesting in itself, I thought, given that we're on Zoom and everybody's on mute. I don't know whether that's going to result in a mild titter or not, but there we are. So I think to sort of summarize this whole process and where this has got to, and perhaps I go back to the first principles where we started this exercise today, because a lot of the questions that perhaps Norrie and Jonathan reported and came up in the session that I had was that everything takes a long time, it's complicated, it's bureaucratic, we've been at it a long time, we don't seem to be there's a natural anxiety about those sorts of issues. And also Ferguson mentioned from, I think, Argyll and Bute in one of the sessions that just get into 8 pages ahead of terms of the rural growth deal so far has taken 2 years, and business cases take a long time. So there has to be a sort of a how do you balance the momentum of the process with the realistic strategy with some of the exercises that you have to go through to deal with these things. And what today was specifically not about, and that was clear because it was supposed to be about broader awareness and understanding, was not to arrive at a definitive strategy as to what the way forward is. And therefore, some of the options have been mentioned by many people, and there are people who've raised other options. Hydro on Jura got raised by one person, but we didn't get a chance to answer the question. And I just see Sam has just said he can now go to Jura, he's going to take an electric vehicle there. When we deal with all those things, there's probably a pressure, and certainly something that I will say to HIE, Argyll and Bute and Scottish Government is, as far as this process is concerned, there should be a clear momentum. There probably needs to be another session of this type, which looks at those options in more detail to get much closer to a strategy and to continue to raise that awareness, possibly on island later in the year when that's possible to do that, and then move towards a consistent approach rather than leave it 15 months, 8 months, and then come back and plonk down a strategy and say, what do we think of that? So I think that what this has shown is there's a huge appetite, interest, enthusiasm, a desire to make progress on these issues. There's a very broad range of issues. They need to be narrowed, and they need to get to a situation where the rural growth deal, to the extent it is able to deliver, and it's not the silver bullet that will deliver everything, to the extent it can deliver, is clear and hopefully at the front of that process. So that I think is where I need to close this session now. I think that we've had a very good afternoon, very good attendance. I thank everybody, the facilitators, particularly. I know that Ross at Local Energy Scotland has had his challenges getting this event on in the way that it needed to be done, and I'm sure he's going to have a minor relaxation through that process. So thank you, everybody, and I hope that this will continue, and perhaps there'll be another event in the not too distant future which allows you to continue this conversation. So at that point, we will close this session. Thank you very much, and goodbye.